What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my Week 10 takeaways video. And in this video, I'm going to tell you everything that I took away from this past week of college football action, sort of recapping the way that this first week in November has shaped the college football landscape. I know October usually is the month of chaos, not only within college football, within the sports realm, especially college football. Guys, we're going to get to see a lot of chaos in November, and I might have just spoiled one of my takeaways, so I won't talk any further, but I do just want to say thank you so much for watching this video and for supporting me in any way you can. Make sure that, well, you do anything you can to support the channel, liking, commenting, sharing, or obviously the two big things, which is something you're already doing right now, which is watching this video, and if you haven't done so already, making sure you hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. All of those things and more would mean so much to me. Literally any way you interact with the channel helps support me on this platform. But if you want to support me elsewhere, go give me a follow on Twitter or X at TailgateNate29. Trying to start to get, or I should say, I am getting a little bit better of an idea on how I want to post stuff over there and how I want to sort of promote myself and show all you fine people the other work I do within the sports media realm. So if that is something you're interested in, I highly suggest that you go over on Twitter or X, follow, stay patient, and things will come and you'll start getting updated on a lot more of the things I do within the sports media realm. But with all that said and done, ladies and gentlemen, let's dive on in to what I took away here from Week 10 of college football action. We only have 4 weeks left in the regular season, and I do want to talk really quickly about where we are, guys. It is the month of November, and it just means more in the college football landscape. If you're a contender, if you're a team trying to crack into bowl eligibility, every game is going to mean something from this point forward, but especially for the contenders. And I talked about this a little bit in the video that I uploaded on Friday. If you watched that one, if not, that's okay. I'll sort of talk about it here. November means it's survive and advance mode, especially for a lot of the top contenders. And again, we have seen that with a lot of teams so far this year, and some teams, even in September, even in October, have kind of been in survive and advance mode, and no one has been at the forefront of that. No one has been more of an example of a survive and advance team than this bunch right here in the Miami Hurricanes. Again, you take a look at this past game for the Hurricanes this past week. They were down, I believe it was, I'm going to double check here so I actually don't get this wrong. But they were down 28-17 at one point to Duke. It was 32-31 Miami with, I believe, just about, into the fourth quarter with about 14 minutes to go in the game. Duke was right there. Duke could have won, and then Cam Ward doing what he's done all season long, putting this team on his back. And I say all season long because, yes, that looks like a 22-point win on the scoreboard, really a whole lot closer than what the scoreboard would say. Miami has sort of survived and advanced all season. They survived against Virginia Tech on the crazy Hail Mary play. They survived against Cal, that epic comeback on the road. They survived against Louisville on the road. The defense for Louisville just made too many more mistakes. They got past Florida State pretty easily, but then they survived this game against Duke. Miami has been the quintessential team as far as surviving and advancing. And you saw two teams out of the SEC do the exact same thing here this week. You saw Georgia survive and advance against Florida. A lot of mistakes made in that one. Carson Beck, what has happened to him? He's been turning into sort of an interception machine. I think 11 interceptions over his past 3, 4, maybe 5 games. That's not the Carson Beck we're used to seeing at all, but they were able to get past their rivals in Florida, and after a great battle from the Kentucky Wildcats, Tennessee was able to survive there, and Nico finally threw for over 200 yards in SEC play. So survive, and even if you go back to last week, you saw Ohio State sort of use that survive and advance mentality against the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Teams that you should beat, but you for some reason or another struggle against. It's important still that you're able to, at very least, find ways to win those games, because at this point in the year, especially if you are a 1 or 2 loss team, more so a 1 loss team, but I mean a 2 loss team, of course, any loss at this point and you're probably done with the way the field is shaking out. But surviving and advancing is going to become the most important thing. Yes, looking good and getting the big wins and completing the eye test, those are all still going to be really big things. Nothing is more important, there you go, than coming out of games with wins. But guys, November is not also going to mean survive and advance mode. It's also going to mean chaos mode. We saw a ton of upsets this past week, and it has shaken up the college football landscape. It has shaken up the playoff atmosphere and the playoff talk, that's for sure. because you had South Carolina at home get a big win over the Texas A&M Aggies, and that means no more undefeated teams left in the SEC, at least in terms of SEC play. We're going to come back to that game a little bit later in this video. Same thing with these two games that you see right here, but Texas Tech, rainy game, sloppy game on the road. They're able to pull that upset off. Taj Brooks gets into the end zone, and they beat the Iowa State Cyclones. And probably the most shocking win this week was Louisville going on the road and playing Clemson. Not only it's because Louisville's been an inconsistent team this year, and apart from that first game against Georgia, Clemson has been really, really good, but the way that Louisville was able to do it and just how poorly Clemson played probably made it the most shocking result here this week. Clemson did not play well. That offense, ever since that Georgia game, was humming, and they just could not find any offensive rhythm whatsoever. Louisville could. Shuck was able to perform really well for this Cardinal team, and Louisville probably going to be back in my top 25. That's going to be uploaded. What I thought was going to be tonight, nope, it's actually going to be uploaded tomorrow because of some graphical things I still got to figure out in terms of how I'm putting it together and some order of teams. I'm still kind of thinking through it a little bit, but regardless, November not only is surviving and advancing time, but if teams do not quote-unquote survive and advance like Texas Tech didn't, like Iowa State didn't, like Clemson didn't, it's going to lead to chaos, it's going to lead to upsets, and it's going to lead to a ton of changes and a ton of thinking to do within that college football playoff decision room. Let's go ahead and move on and talk about some conferences here. And really, guys, if you take a look at it, there is still absolutely a chance that both of these conferences sneak in more than one teams. But I think more likely than not, when you take a look right now at the ACC and when you take a look right now at the Big 12, I think these are really set out to only be one bid leagues. And you see here where they currently stand in the AP poll, the ACC. I've included Louisville in there because, I mean, maybe if there's some chaos that happens, then yeah, Louisville can sneak into an ACC championship game, but they got 3 losses. They'd have to win the conference. I just don't see it. And then you talk about the 4 teams that I talked about in my last video and in the video where I discussed sort of the college football playoff race and how it is sort of breaking down and shaping out, right? Miami, SMU, Clemson, Pitt, probably the front runners there in the ACC, although now SMU has got that win over Pitt, and Clemson just lost to Louisville this past week. Clemson and Pitt play next week, baby. That is an ACC elimination game. The loser of that game, no more college football playoff hopes, probably no more ACC championship hopes, and it looks like Miami and SMU right now on that collision course to meet in Charlotte. But then when you take a look at the Big 12, it's BYU that controls their own destiny, and really BYU, even if they lose a conference game, which I really don't see them doing here down the stretch, BYU, oh, my apologies for that. BYU is going to have a fairly easy run here to the Big 12 championship game. Now, you got to watch out for this game on the road against Utah. I think that is one that absolutely got to watch out for. I know no Cam Rising, but that's a rivalry game on the road against Arizona State. I think you got to watch out for that one as well. Even Kansas and Houston just knocking off the Kansas State Wildcats, a game we'll talk about in just a little bit here as well. That could also be some pretty dangerous teams. But all in all, when you take a look at the way that both of these conference races are shaping out, I think it's going to be really hard for any one of these two conferences to get multiple teams into the college football playoff. Now, what would have to happen for that to be the case? Well, I believe that first and foremost, I mean, you're going to have some chaos somewhere, right? You're probably going to have some chaos in the SEC, which we're going to talk about later here, and you're probably going to have some chaos in the Big Ten, which looks unlikely. And well, the favorites are going to have to win out. Miami and SMU. Maybe SMU goes and wins the ACC championship game, and that's the only loss for Miami. Both of them probably get in at that point. Same thing with if Iowa State's able to beat Kansas State in that regular season finale, then they go on and they beat an undefeated BYU in the conference title game. There'd absolutely be a conversation for both of them to get into the college football playoffs. So right now, they're looking like one bid leagues to me, guys, with the way the rest of the conference is shaping out. And I'm not saying there still aren't multiple playoff-worthy teams. Obviously, Miami, SMU, maybe Clemson can still find a way to sneak in there. And obviously, BYU and Iowa State, at this point, Kansas State and Colorado would probably have to win the conference in order to get into the college football playoff. But I think it's going to be really hard for either of these two conferences to get a second team in, especially if what we think is going to happen happens, what's predictable happens, and all the favorites go on ahead and win out. Let's talk about the biggest game of the weekend. And no, it is not my biggest takeaway because I thought about this. This was going to be my biggest takeaway. And then I was thinking last night about, hang on, there's this that could happen within this conference. So I'm going to talk about that here a little bit later. But I want to talk about Ohio State and I want to talk about Penn State. I mean, Ohio State still on top of the mountain along with Oregon, because again, Oregon did beat the Buckeyes at home by 1 point. Ohio State still proved as to why they are on top of the mountain talent-wise within the Big Ten Conference. A lot of people were doubting them. A lot of people were counting them out, especially that offensive line. And how about that offensive line? You move Donovan Jackson to left tackle, a position he's never played in his life, and you move your starting center from last year in Carson Hinsman to the left guard position, a position he's never played in his life. And Will Howard, with the quarterback run, something that Buckeye fans have wanted to see a lot more of this season, running through the left side of the offensive line, helped win them that game against Penn State, along with their red zone defense, which was pretty solid for both teams, because obviously you had the punch out for Penn State on that Will Howard, what would have been possibly a first and goal setup play. Ohio State would have scored later on in that drive. Maybe Will Howard even gets into the end zone on that play. Good job by Penn State to punt it out. But they got into the red zone, some self-inflicted wounds, and Penn State ends up taking a field goal on the first drive of the game. They later on go ahead and get down there, jump ball into the end zone. It looks like it is going to be a Penn State touchdown, but the corner Davison Igbinosun able to rip it away, kind of the ball that gets battled around and it gets batted between both guys. Igbinosun able to come up with it with his feet down in the end zone. And then you just go ahead and, well, you take a look at the most crucial set of plays in the game. First and goal from the 3 for Penn State, set up by Tyler Warren. A chance there to tie that game, possibly send the thing to the overtime and give Penn State a shot. They are stuffed on the run once, twice, 3 times, and then they try to throw a little fade route to Tyler Warren. That doesn't work. Tries to go into the back of the end zone. It's covered beautifully by this Buckeye defense, and Ohio State. I'm very surprised with the way that they were able to run the ball here in this game, especially because it's a little bit of a makeshift offensive line, especially because you have one of the best run defenses in the country on the other side of the field. I was very impressed with this Ohio State team. Now, was it pretty? No. Was it a blowout win on the road? No. But I think it was a little bit more convincing than the scoreboard would lead you to believe. And I think that Ohio State versus Indiana, they overcame an early 10-0 deficit and hung 47 unanswered points on Michigan State here in a couple weeks on November 23rd. Likely now going to be a play-in game, not necessarily for the college football playoff, because I think no matter what team loses that game, both of them still have a pretty good shot to get into the playoff regardless, and Penn State still got an insanely good shot to get into the college football playoff. But that's going to be a play-in game probably for the Big Ten championship, because I don't see Michigan beating Ohio State. Ohio State is definitely Indiana's toughest test the rest of the way, and I don't see the Hoosiers losing. I really don't see Penn State dropping another game here either. Maybe watch out for that road one against Minnesota here. But, I mean, all in all, you take a look at these 3-team schedules, Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana. Even if you take a look at Oregon as well, I don't think Oregon is going to be dropping a game anytime soon. Their toughest test was probably Michigan. Yeah, the road game against Wisconsin can give them some fits, but I don't think it's going to be much trouble for them. It wasn't much trouble for Penn State. This Big Ten race is probably all but set. Oregon's probably going to be in. Penn State's probably going to be out. And the winner of Ohio State and Indiana in Columbus on November 23rd will meet Oregon. And I believe it's Indianapolis. Might be Vegas, but I'm almost positive it is Indianapolis. I really should have looked that up before I recorded this video. Regardless of where it is, Oregon and the winner of Ohio State, Indiana will probably end up being your Big Ten championship game. But the number one takeaway from this week, and I just want all of you to sort of play this out with me, right? I think we could absolutely get a doomsday scenario within the SEC. So you go ahead and you take a look. There are still a ton, and I mean a ton, of important games within the SEC to still play out. Guys, there is a scenario, and it doesn't involve any crazy upsets. It doesn't involve anything horrific. It doesn't involve anything really super crazy. All it involves is maybe a couple things to go right here and there for a couple teams, and every team in the SEC is going to wind up with at least 2 losses overall and 2 losses within conference play, and it happens like this. This week, week 11. There are 2 very important games that will have preview prediction videos on my channel, and this is not my predictions for those games, by the way. Not my prediction for those games. Just play out a little scenario with me throughout the rest of the season. Ole Miss and Georgia play this week. Let's say that Ole Miss wins that game. They already got 2 conference losses. Well, now that gives Georgia 2 conference losses right there as well. You move on later down the line, Alabama and LSU, a game that already is going to be a game that probably determines which team is still in the conversation versus which team is going to be out of the college football playoff race. But in terms of conference losses, we are going to say that Alabama wins that game because that gives LSU 2 conference losses right there. So, okay, after then this next weekend, presuming all the other favorites win out, Texas A&M, Tennessee, and Texas. Those are the only 3 teams left with 1 loss in SEC play, right? Well, then the very next week, week 12, Georgia and Tennessee have to play. Let's say that Georgia beats Tennessee. Okay, well, there you go. That gives Tennessee 2 conference losses right there as well. You go ahead and move on further down the line. Texas and Arkansas, well, they still have to play there as well. LSU and Vanderbilt still have to play. The only thing, now that I'm thinking about it, that would probably have to go wrong in this sense is Texas A&M would have to drop an upset game somewhere. Texas A&M would have to get upset somewhere. And the most likely case for them to do that would be the road game against Auburn. And so we'll play that scenario out. If Texas A&M loses to Auburn, that gives them 2 conference losses, meaning the only other 1-loss team would be Texas in the SEC. But then Texas goes on the road and loses to Texas A&M. So to recap, Ole Miss beats Georgia, and Georgia beats Tennessee. So there are 2 losses right there for Georgia and Tennessee. Alabama beats LSU, probably eliminating LSU from the college football playoff. But in terms of the SEC title race, well, they're going to be sitting with 2 losses right there as well. And then let's just say, I mean, I don't really care who wins against Vanderbilt and LSU. It'll probably be the LSU Tigers, so that just eliminates the Vanderbilt Commodores, and I don't think they're going to make it to Atlanta anyway. But then Texas A&M, they get that upset loss on the road to Auburn, 2nd upset loss of the year after that one that just happened this past week against South Carolina, and then Texas goes on the road and loses to Texas A&M. The only really crazy thing that would have to happen is for the A&M Aggies to have another upset loss on the road, which they're not going to lose their next game against New Mexico State here in a couple of weeks. So it'd have to be you lose to Auburn and then you beat Texas. That would be an absolute doomsday scenario for the Southeastern Conference. Who gets into Atlanta? Who gets into the college football playoff? And now, again, I doubt that all of that is going to happen. But, I mean, I did not say anything super outlandish there, probably besides A&M going on the road and losing to Auburn. That would probably have to take a lot to happen just because Auburn's offense overall not really that great. But, I mean, we could see a scenario where every team in the SEC has at least 2 losses, and it is not out of the realm of possibility at all. Even if the Aggies don't go on the road and even if the Aggies don't go on the road and lose to the Auburn Tigers, and they'll be in the SEC championship game, they still got 2 overall losses on the season. So the race down the stretch in the SEC is going to be one of the most interesting, possibly the most interesting this conference has ever had. And I mean ever. Go back and look throughout SEC history, and I'm a fairly young fellow. There's probably a year in the 80s or 90s that I just am not familiar with, I'll be honest. But overall, this year in the SEC is crazy. We could see doomsday within the SEC, and it is not super out of the realm of possibility. It really isn't. So I just can't wait to see the race in the Southeastern Conference here down the stretch, but I am going to go ahead and close out this video because I talked for a little bit longer than I usually do in my weekly takeaway videos. But thank you all so much for watching this video. Hey, remember to play hard but tailgate harder. November is going to be a crazy month for college football. We'll have top 25 and hopefully college football playoff predictions as we are now starting that. We are in November, both coming out tomorrow. Then we'll get into preview with some games. And then Tuesday night, I'll try my best to do a little bit of an instant reaction to the college football playoff rankings. Hey, remember to play hard but tailgate harder. See all you guys in the next video. Goodbye.